Welcome to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, the show where brilliant professionals share how to sharpen the universal skills required to flourish at work. Enjoy more career fun, wins, meaning, and money with your host, Pete Makaitis.
Hello and welcome to episode 865 with Dave Crenshaw. We brought Dave back for a third time because he has so much goodness to share. This time coming from some of the insights from his new podcast, the Dave Crenshaw Success Project. And we zoomed into some of the commonalities he's been discovering about what are some key things, some principles that successful people tend to do fairly reliably, repeatedly in terms of a pattern that pops up. So you'll learn one thing every professional should learn. 2, the trick to multiplying your career opportunities. And 3, why to take that risk now instead of later. So if you want to check out the show notes or the transcript or the links to items that we've referenced here, please visit us over at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP865. And if you're at awesomeatyourjob.com, I recommend you check out some of our goodies, such as the Gold Nugget email list, which lets you get the summary write-up of actionable insights Dave shared in an email you can read in about 2 or 3 minutes. And when you sign up, you also unlock the vault of all 865 of these Gold Nugget summary write-ups. And that's just one of the cool, nifty benefits to be found when you mosey over to awesomeatyourjob.com. Now, here's some nifty stuff about Dave. Dave Crenshaw develops productive leaders in Fortune 500 companies, universities, and organizations of every size. He's appeared in Time Magazine, USA Today, Fast Company, and the BBC News. His courses on LinkedIn Learning have been viewed tens of millions of times. His 5 books have been published in 8 languages, the most popular of which is called The Myth of Multitasking, a time management bestseller. As an author, speaker, and online instructor, Dave has transformed the lives and careers of hundreds of thousands of humans around the world. Big thanks to Dave for sharing his wisdom with us, and big thanks to our sponsors. Check them out. Now, here's Dave. Dave, welcome back to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast.
Hey, Pete, I really appreciate it. It's very generous of you to have me come back again. What is this, the third time?
I think so. I think third time is the charm. So the first 2 that we botched, we'll hopefully redeem ourselves.
Yeah, exactly.
So Dave, I'm intrigued. You are up to a whole new project, and in fact, your name is on it, and I hope it's successful. It's called the Dave Crenshaw Success Project, a podcast. And we talked about this back when you were just conceiving it, and it's fun that it's up and out into the world. So I first wanted to hear a little bit of the story. You pursued this project not with the goal of advancing your empire as a expert speaker, course creator, dude, but something else. What's the scoop here?
Yeah, well, so those who aren't familiar, I've written books and I've got courses, over 30 courses on LinkedIn Learning. I know you've got, a lot more than that, and you've been very popular on that platform. And I do speaking as well, but what I wanted was something that inspired me and scratched the itch that wasn't required by making a lot of money. And I had a lot of different versions, and I think you and I had some conversations about different things that I could pursue. But what really moved me, the thing that got me going, was the idea that I want to create something for my kids. So I have 3 children. My son's 17. I have a daughter who's 13 and another daughter who is 10, my youngest. And I thought, I want to leave a legacy to them. What is something that I can create to help them be successful, but at the same time, other people will benefit from? And that's where this idea of the Success Project came from. And if I were to sum it up in a sentence, it's that I am getting the stories of others, and you're one of those people, we did an interview, to learn universal principles of balanced success. So I know a lot of times in a podcast interview, you bring someone on who has a book, they have a course, and you're going to discuss that. And I think that's great. My goal is a little bit different. I bring someone on and I want to hear their story. And in their story, I want to figure out what are the things that would make any person successful, and how can we apply that to ourselves? How can I apply that to my kids?
Well, hey, I'm all about universal principles. So indeed, this is a great fit here. And so I'm intrigued then. Your kids, they also play a role in the production, I understand.
Yeah. The first and most fun one is my daughter, Darcy, who's 10. She reads the outro It's the cutest thing you've ever heard in your life. It's completely unfair for me to put that at the end because you are powerless to resist it. And my son, he does the editing, which is wonderful because now I can pay him as an editor, which helps him prepare for college. But the fun thing that I've also started doing, I don't think I had started this when you and I did the interview, Pete, is we're doing bonus episodes where we'll sit down and have a conversation about a principle that we learned. So for instance, one person I interviewed was Tahani Aburane. She was a refugee in Jordan, and she went from that situation to being a millionaire in real estate. And she talked about how gratitude was so essential for her success and how her mom taught her to be grateful, even when they were in these really, really difficult conditions in a refugee camp. And so I sat down with my kids and said, let's talk about gratitude. Let's talk about how we can be more grateful and some ways we can implement it. So I've got the regular episodes that release where we're hearing these stories, but then I've decided to have a little fun with some bonus episodes with my kids. And that's sort of why I chose the title that I did, because the Success Project is open-ended enough that it gives me a lot of latitude to try a lot of different things that will help the listener be successful and help my kids be successful.
All righty. Well, so lay it on us, Dave. What are some principles that have really already popped off the page? Let's hear. How many interviews have you done, first of all?
I'm around the 20 interview mark. So, gosh, what do you have? 2,000?
Oh, shucks. 860-ish?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm an infant learning to crawl at this point. But I've started to see some really interesting threads. And I'll start with one that I did not expect at all, but it makes sense when I say it, is the importance of studying business. It is amazing to me how many people I've interviewed who maybe do something that is different than business. For example, Angie Ford is one person. She owns several music schools and daycares. She studied piano. That's what she wanted to be, was a concert pianist. But for some reason, she was interested in business and got a minor in it. And because she did that, that enabled her to be successful as an entrepreneur. And I have seen that one thing repeated over and over. Whether or not that was their primary interest, someone took the time to study the principles of business and accounting and marketing and sales. And so I've told my kids, and right now, it's kind of funny, right now, every single one of them wants to be a writer. I did not expect that either. And so I tell them, hey, study whatever you want in college, but the one requirement I'm going to make of you is that you have to at least minor in business.
Okay. So the business skills are handy in terms of there's just a business side to everything. No matter what you're doing, whether you're a baker or doing music or daycare, there is a business side. And whether you're the owner or somewhere lower within the hierarchy of things, having that understanding is coming in handy.
Right. Even if you're a middle manager in a Fortune 500 company and you're hired to do one specific thing, let's say communications, understanding how the company operates and understanding cash flow and the things that determine a stock price and all of these things, they make you more savvy and more able to understand and read the tea leaves, so to speak, about what is going to be coming in the future. And I think that you don't have to go to college to study it. I think that, certainly listening to this podcast, someone who's made the commitment to do that, already that says a lot about their character and their desire to learn. I think that you could start reading books. I think that there are certainly courses on LinkedIn Learning that will help you learn these skills. I would carve out a part of your schedule each week, each month to give it some attention.
And I'm curious about some of your favorite resources, like learning business. Business is quite an umbrella. Is it fair to say that you're saying a general survey understanding of management, accounting, finance, marketing, strategy? Is that what you mean by learn business?
Correct. Yeah. Whether you took that in college, whether you're getting it on your own, you're saying, hey, I want to get a good understanding. I know one thing that's been really helpful for me in my career is economics. I'm turning and looking at my shelf right now. I've got a couple of books about economics, one called Basic Economics, right? And sometimes we're always looking for the next new title that's going to give us some cool principle. And that's great. I've built my career on books like that. But I think there's something to be said for digging down into the fundamentals And I recommend taking the time to drill down on some of just the fundamentals, because those will influence how you perceive things that are happening in your career.
I dig that. Is that Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell?
Yes, it is.
I have that book. It's a little thick. I haven't finished it, but I loved one of his points, which was to evaluate policies not based upon their intentions, because they're all good. All policies have good intentions, but rather upon the economic incentives that they create for the different players and stakeholders. And that made a whole lot of sense when I read that. Like, oh yeah, I can see how sometimes when things don't quite work out, I think rent control was an example he used. It's really helpful to put yourself in the shoes of each of the players there, like, for example, the landlords, and see, given this legislation, what might they be more or less inclined to do because they're going to be affected by this new set of rules? And that was a big light bulb for me, actually.
Yes. And see, that's beautiful. And that says a lot about you, the fact that you would remember that principle from reading that book. And just understanding that, if you're in a managerial situation, now you're going to say, oh, if I change something, what's the effect on the individuals that are following it? And that nugget of knowledge is so basic and it's so fundamental, but it's so useful. In the same way that water is useful to our physical survival, it's a basic, it's a fundamental, and we want to at least spend a little time consuming those things. And, in my career, the myth of multitasking, a big influence that economics had for me was the idea of microeconomics and switching cost. That's my love of economics and learning it is what led me to help people with time management. And someone listening to this might have that same experience with accounting, right? And they enjoy that concept of first in, first out, or whatever the principles are that they're reading. And they can make that a part of being a bricklayer. Or that's a terrible example, but they can make those principles a part of any career that they have.
Yeah, and it can help you get an understanding of all sorts of mysteries. You mentioned bricklaying. One of my great mysteries, Dave, is why home renovation professionals, whether it be electricians or plumbers or masons or whomever, it seems like historically I've had a heck of a time finding someone who would actually like show up and do things. And then when you do find a winner, you're like, oh my gosh, you are my plumber for life. You're my electrician for life. But I think the principles of economics can help it illustrate that. My leading theory right now is, hey, Pete, you are a small fry with a small job, and it takes me lots of time to get over to you and to the hardware store, etc., to get a small amount of revenue, versus there are people with much bigger jobs, which take me the same amount of time to get there and get the materials, and yet produce a whole lot more moolah for me and the team to take care of business. That's my current theory, at least. But without an understanding of economics, I might just be, well, I guess I'm still frustrated because I don't have a plumber or whatever showing up. But at least that demystifies that or inspires some ideas like, maybe I could work with a contractor and bundle a lot of stuff at once. So I would be a more appealing customer in a world in which they can be pretty choosy when there's not as many home renovation pros as there is a demand for their services.
Yeah, that's a great example. And to kind of put a bow on this, I think what we want to do is say, how does this apply to me? I think the tendency of most people, and I've seen this in my coaching and training, the tendency of most people is to listen to new knowledge and say, that doesn't apply to me. Well, I'm going to ignore that part of what I just read because that doesn't apply to me. The question we want to ask ourselves is, how does this apply to me? How can I make this principle of accounting apply in my job in HR? And if you just take the time to drill down and think about it and pause for a second, you'll find applications.
That's cool. And I like that, taking the time to actively think. And when you're drawing a blank, I'll tell you what, I have been playing around a lot with this, with AI and Chat GPT. I did it a year ago and I thought that was kind of some cool tricks. But now with the upgraded powers, it's pretty cool. Like that's the kind of a prompt that could really spark some ideas going. Is like, hey, I am in this business and I just learned this concept. How is this at all applicable to me? And then give me 10 ideas. And then it does. You're like, oh, okay. And then that's what I found it to be most useful for. Its final product headlines and teasers and copy is inadequate in my opinion. But as a little brainstormer thought partner, I'm finding all kinds of fun little uses there.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, and then that might be another subject associated with learning stuff. That's a principle, like learn business. We've mentioned basic economics and basic principles of business. Are there any other resources that you found just absolutely killer?
Well, one common thread that I've seen so far in the interviews that I've done, and I've seen this also with people that I've coached through the years, is taking advantage of bonus opportunities. And what I mean by that is, well, I'll give you an example. So I interviewed Kwame Christian. You know Kwame,
yeah,
right? Have you had him on your show?
Indeed.
So one of the things that he mentioned was that he took advantage of a debate club as he was going to school, and he participated in that. And that participation opened up his eyes to the idea of negotiation and how to have difficult conversations. And I've seen that several times where they're going to school, they're participating in something, and there's this ancillary opportunity that isn't really going to show up on a resume for a job application, and they go participate in it, and that participation leads them to something new. And it goes back to that idea of, people think there's one path to success. The path is you pick a career, you go to school and study that career, you get your grades, then you go and work somewhere. But the reality is it's the little opportunities that you might take for granted, the things that are going to help you figure out what you really want to do and are going to help you grow in your career.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. And I believe you highlighted that as a theme in my interview when you had me in terms of, that stuff you were doing in college and high school in terms of giving that speech. You're like, speaking's awesome. And it's interesting that other people are terrified of this, and yet I'm super jazzed about it. There's a lesson there.
Yes. And it also highlights the idea that go where your strengths are. And I was just reviewing the interview that I had with Kwame. He said, go where your curiosity is. And it's not so much about your passion. Your passion can be useful, but I was passionate about playing music and being a rock star, not necessarily a very usable career for me. But I was curious about entrepreneurship. I was curious about time management. I would go to the extra lectures where I went to school and listen to entrepreneurs talk about their experience. Those things that I was curious about are the things that became most influential in my career. So someone listening to this, you can ask yourself, what am I most interested in that maybe isn't a part of my career at the moment? Am I giving myself opportunities to immerse myself in those things and do a little bit of it, even if it's outside of the everyday work that you do? And when you do that, you're opening your mind, you're opening your time, you're opening your opportunities, leading to what probably is going to lead you to the most success in your career.
That's really cool. And something that's come up on my podcast a number of times is folks to actually look back at what you were super interested in when you were younger can have some real clues for you. Like before you were obligated, mandated, directed, desperate for cash, any number of pressures entered your world. What was just kind of interesting to you that you were curious about, that you dug into? And you may very well not become a professional baseball player or rock star or magician, kind of whatever that might have been. But there's something under the surface there in terms of, maybe with the magic tricks, it was delighting an audience, or with being a rock and roll, it's kind of learning a thing and just getting immersed, or a sense of mastery. And to sort of see just kind of what's the thing underneath the thing if you're not going to be a pro sports guy or a rock and roll person.
Yeah. What are the principles? What did I gain from this experience? And whether or not you're in that career, what you learned in it will help you the most. That's something I see with my wife, who is a high school swim coach. And the reality is most of the kids that she coaches won't be swimming past high school. right? And most aren't even going to get a college scholarship. So what are the moments within that extracurricular activity that give them an opportunity to grow and learn life skills about hard work and persistence and working with team members?
That's good. I'd also love to hear you, Dave, tell me, did you see any conventional wisdom get skewered along the way in terms of maybe there are some tropes or standard issue truth, wisdom, guidance that is ballied about that your guests have actually revealed? No, actually, it turns out that's wrong. And here's a better way.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, Pete. And I'm going to tread delicately here with it.
Can't wait.
But I think it's important to be said that I think there is a concept out there that having a family holds you back. That your kids are going to slow you down and keep you from being successful if you choose to have kids. Or even I need to wait later in my life to get married because marriage to my spouse is going to hold me back. And I have found that in both of those cases, the opposite is true. Let's talk about children for just a second. Or even if you choose to be a caretaker of someone else, what that does is it enforces limitations in your day. First, we can, just setting aside all the wonderful benefits of being a parent, which there are, just from a structural standpoint in your career, it forces you to not work crazy hours. And if you love your children, you're going to want to say, how can I spend time with them? And if I have to spend time with them, that means that I won't be able to wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and work all the way to 9 p.m. I'm going to have to find breaks. And that relationship creates boundary that forces you to figure out how to be more productive. It's really sloppy productivity to allow yourself to work long hours. You're just masking a bunch of inefficiencies in your day when you allow yourself to work those hours. But if you say, I'm not going to go past 5 p.m., and this is, I call this principle the finish line. You define what your finish line is in the day. I'm not going to cross that. Well, if you have to stop working by 5 p.m. because your kids are going to be coming home, you're going to have to figure out, how can I get everything done? And if you have to figure that out, now I got to say, how can I do a better job at delegation? How can I do a better job of automation? How can I do a better job of focusing on what's most valuable? So that's one of the first themes that I've heard come up several times. And the other one is the value of a great partner. And however you structure that partnership with another human being, whether that's through marriage or just through a long-term committed relationship, the idea is that person creates a ground and a ballast to what you're doing. And of course, this is assuming that you've made a great choice, or at least a good choice. But having that person in your life creates stability, creates confidence, and you can divide the labor between the two of you in a way that's useful, and that will help you grow in your career.
That's cool. And I've also heard stories that once folks become aware, oh, we're pregnant, baby's on the way, suddenly.
Yeah, that's my story.
Yeah, the motivation, the seriousness really gets kicked up a notch. It's like, okay, no, for real, I'm going to make this thing work.
Yeah. I mean, when I give my speeches about the myth of multitasking, that's one of the first things that I bring up. The two words that changed everything in my life and changed my career were, I'm pregnant. And when I heard those, I thought, my gosh, I need to start getting more focused. And there's this life coming in this world. And that caused me to make that transition from maybe just pursuing my passion to pursuing a passion that was profitable. And that led me to returning to my work as a business coach and preparing how to be an author. And that story still colors everything I do to this day.
So we've covered some things that are great to do. What are some things you really recommend that we not do?
Yes, I would say don't be afraid to fail. A lot of people are so concerned that something isn't going to work out that they stop from making any kind of attempt. And I would say to not allow that to prevent you from taking risks. And especially don't allow yourself to say, in the future, at some point, I'm going to take this risk. The earlier you take that risk, the less costly it will be. So if you're listening to this right now and you're just starting your career and you're not married and you're just coming out of college or whatever, now is the best time to take that sort of risk. So don't hold back. And even if you say, well, I'm married and I'm a little bit further down my career, now is a better time to take that risk than 5 years from now or 10, fail early. And that will create more opportunities. And if you fail, great, but you can recover from it. And I wasn't afraid to fail early in my career, and I did. And it took a while to recover from it, but that was also an opportunity to learn and to grow. And that is often just as, if not more educational than an official college degree.
That's a really cool perspective there. To take the risk earlier gives you more opportunity to recover or to pivot or to take advantage of the things that you've learned, the relationships you've built, the discoveries that you've made, as opposed to if you wait 10 years or however long, you will just have less time to pivot, sort it out, make good things from the pieces and the ashes that have emerged from that failure. That's really cool.
I know someone who just began their journey as an entrepreneur and owning their own business. And that's great that they're pursuing it. But the sad thing is they're on the downward side of middle age. And for 30 or more years, he's always wanted to own his own business. That's a long time to hold on to that regret. Whereas if he had pursued it earlier, either he would have succeeded or he would not have that anymore and say, you know what, I took a try at that. I don't have to think about it anymore. And it's funny, that's part of the narrative that my wife and I have around my attempting to be a rock star. I had a band, I wrote songs and sung keys, and I was doing that in my mid to late 20s. Now I can look back and say, wow, I'm glad I'm not doing that anymore. that was crazy. We'll go somewhere and I'll see a band setting up for something. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm not doing that. But if I had never done it, where would I be right now? Oh, I could have done it, right? I'm like Uncle Rico in Napoleon Dynamite, talking about how I could throw the football over those mountains. Give it a shot. Even if you do it part-time in conjunction with the job that you've got, give it a try now, and then you can confidently move on with your life, or something amazing will happen because of your hard work and because of the risk that you took.
Yeah, that's cool to get a real sense of what is the reality associated with this dream. And I think folks have found it really does go both ways in terms of professional music or being a lawyer or whatever is just the coolest, or is, wow, not for me. Good to know early and reorient from there.
Indeed. Yeah, that's it. Do it now. Give it a try now. And you've still got time to learn from it and to do something else if it doesn't work out.
All right. Well, Dave, tell me anything else you want to make sure to mention before we hear about some of your favorite things.
Well, one thing that I really thought about, and as you mentioned at the beginning, you've done 800 episodes. Another principle and a pattern of success is consistency over years. And I've seen this in my work with entrepreneurs. They'll get started, they'll start a business, they'll go for a year, maybe two, and then they start getting bored and they start doing something else. And sometimes, well, you've seen this, Pete. Let's just talk about podcasting for a second. You go online, and how many podcasts do you see listed that have 1 to 3 episodes? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are 8 million podcasts, but how many of them really go beyond the first 5 or so episodes? Not most. Most are less than that. And it illustrates the idea that when we start something, we've got to stick at it for a while. We've got to keep going at it for a while. And I've seen this with my own career. For instance, my courses with LinkedIn Learning. I mean, I started out in 2011 when it was lynda.com, and it was my first course. There's so much value in being a part of that and having a partnership with someone, like in my case, LinkedIn Learning, in your case as well, for 12 years. when you're in the pipeline that long, more people have an opportunity to learn about you. And if you think about something that you're passionate about, I'm talking to the listener now. If you think about something you're passionate about and want to pursue, make a commitment to do it for a good long while. And just the principle of longevity and consistently doing it will lead to paying off. I like to say that impatience is the enemy of success. And the reason why it's the enemy of success is it causes us to pull up roots too early. And I use pulling up roots because I'm thinking of like a farming metaphor. We plant the seeds, we put water on them, and then we go away for a little bit. And then maybe we come back a little bit later and we look at it and go, oh, well, it hasn't grown anything. A lot of people in that situation go, well, this was terrible. I'm not doing this anymore. And they just rip everything up. When we've got to give it time. We've got to keep nurturing it. We've got to keep feeding it. And then after a while, you'll start to see the fruits of your labors. So I recognize that what you've accomplished, Pete, in your podcast, a lot of it is talent. A lot of it is the hard work. But a lot of it, too, is just the fact that you have just kept at it for 800 episodes.
Yeah, it's true. Things do pay off with consistency over time. No, not always. Sometimes it's like, hey, entrepreneur, that concept just isn't hitting the mark for people. And so I think that it's a matter of saying, well, what?
Right. But you've got to give it enough time to really figure that out.
Exactly. And so I think about it from, hypothesis-driven thinking in terms of, okay, what do we need to learn? What are we testing? And I think, I'm kind of bored. I want to do something else is not a great reason, as opposed to, I think about my failed businesses. It's like, not a single person ever bought this thing. It seems they don't actually want it after all. So then you could either say, well, maybe let's pivot, adjust the offer, or if there's no good adjustments to be made, it's like, okay, well, it's time to say goodbye and move on and collect the learnings.
Yeah. And I'm aware of the paradox of what we just talked about, because just before this, we were talking about failing and failing early, right? And now I'm saying keep at it for a good long while. So the question is, how can you tell the difference between the two? If you don't mind, Pete, I'm going to turn that on you for a second. How do you personally tell the difference between when you've failed and when you just need to stay consistent with it?
Well, I think it's really a matter of looking at the evidence and ideally thinking about sort of tests, experiments, hypotheses, like what would need to be true for this thing to be successful, and to see if there's some indicators. Like I think in the business world, if it's like, hey, you know what? We have successfully gotten 20 clients who are just love what we're doing here, but we haven't quite managed to get to a break-even positive cash flow point. Well, I think that says you got something. I would not walk away from that lightly. Or if you're bored, I would say, well, let's figure out what are the remaining challenges we have to solve and then solve them. Versus we've tried a dozen different marketing channels and not a single person has opted to part with their money for this thing we thought was so cool. Maybe this thing isn't really resonating. And then you might choose to say exit entirely, or say, well, maybe it needs to be tweaked to make it more appealing. Or maybe there's a different segment that would really be into it. Maybe we were trying to go broad, but at the end of the day, this is really going to appeal to roofers. And we'll go all in on roofers or kind of whatever the segment is. So I guess that's how I would think about distinguishing it is what evidence and signals have we collected to indicate this thing could be a winner versus not.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. And so if I were to put my own spin on it, I would say break it into milestones. So it's so easy when we engage in an experiment to think only long term. All right, 5 years from now, this is where I'm going to be, and I'm going to cash out of my business and own a private island. But the real question is, what is the experiment of this month? What's the milestone that we're trying to accomplish this month? Were we successful in accomplishing that? Was I able to get this many customers? Was I able to get this many people to listen? Whatever it is, And then you move from that milestone to the next one that's maybe a little bit bigger. So you want to create a pattern of success, but also set the milestones of success at more realistic and reasonable things in the beginning. So then you just go from success to success, bigger and bigger as you go along. Or you have a string of months where you're not hitting any of the milestones and you stop and say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with this experiment that I'm engaging in.
That sounds good. Well, now could you share a favorite quote, something you find inspiring?
Yeah, my favorite one, and someone who really inspires me, is Bob Ross. And I know Bob Ross has almost become a meme these days, but the reality is, as an educator and his ability to reach people, he had a gift that not many people possess. And so as someone who teaches people, I look at the way he does it. Obviously, my personality is not quite the same, but his love, his passion inspires me. And so one of my favorite quotes, and I got a big custom poster made, it's framed on my wall. And the quote is, "Every time you devote time to practice, you haven't lost. You're always a winner." And if I'm reinterpreting that phrase, I'm saying everything that you do is practice. Everything that you attempt is useful. Even if you fail, if you can learn from it, then you didn't fail at all. You're still winning. And boy, Pete, do I refer back to this mentally when I engage in those experiments that don't work out.
All right. And a favorite study or experiment or bit of research?
I'll answer this in an indirect way, probably not what you were expecting. But as a coach and as an educator, I'm a big believer in the experiment of one. And what I mean by that is sometimes we'll read a study and it will say 70% of people found that taking a break at work makes them more productive and makes them more effective, right? And that's something that I teach. But what I want to instead say is, don't rely on the experiment of others because you might be in the 30%. Don't take my word for it. Try it yourself. Give yourself time to try something that you've heard for the first time and experiment it. I like 2-week experiments. Really give it a try for 2 weeks. And then at the end of that, assess, what did your experiment of one give you? Did it work for you? Are there any adjustments that you'd make? Then that way, and you keep referring back to it, now you're becoming the scientist of your own life rather than depending on other people to tell you what you should do based on some study.
All right. And a favorite book?
Actually, I'm going to mention something that is really off the beaten path, but something I'm passionate about. And it's Hustle 2.0 has a series of books. And I would encourage anyone to look it up. Hustle 2.0 is a program that teaches people who are incarcerated how to turn their lives around. And so the books, they've got 3 of them, teach people who have been through trauma and teach people who have been through some really rough life experiences how to overcome it, how to be stronger on the other side. And the curriculum is written by people who have been incarcerated. And the reason why this is top of mind is I just recently went to the Utah State Correctional Facility and met a lot of people who have used this book. And I've read it and I've even talked about it with my kids. And it's so powerful to see how a book written by someone who has been in that situation can completely change their life. So yeah, it's a hard one to get, but you can find it at Hustle 2.0 or hustle20.com.
All right. And a favorite tool, something you use to be awesome at your job?
Everyone likes to ask me this as a time management guy, what's your favorite tool? And my favorite tool is the one that everybody already has. They just don't use it properly. And that's your calendar. I just use that for everything. Even if I'm scheduling time to take time off, I'm scheduling everything in the calendar. And I wager to guess that everyone listening to this could do a little bit better job of using their calendar to help them be productive.
Okay. And a favorite habit?
I'll share one that I didn't do for a long time. I've done a much better job recently of taking care of my physical health. If we're talking about the podcast too, one of the things that I want to do is interview people who have balanced success. And I've learned through the wrong way that not being healthy ruins everything. It doesn't matter what you've accomplished in your career or in your life. If you're feeling physically miserable, it's not much of a success at all. So I've done a much better job of the habit of exercising regularly. I try to do it at least 5 times a week with both cardio and some lifting. And boy, it's made everything a lot better for me.
All right. And is there a key quote you're famous for, Dave?
Well, one that pops to the top of my mind is whenever you say yes to one thing, you're saying no to something else.
Oh, that sounds like opportunity cost.
There you go. Exactly. There's that economics influencing things, and it works in a microeconomic situation, a nano economic situation. When you're making choices in your day to say yes to something, something has to give. It's always a trade-off. So say yes to the most valuable things and say no to the things that are less valuable.
All right. And if folks want to learn more or get in touch, where would you point them?
The easiest place is davecrenshaw.com. Crenshaw is CRENSHAW. And you can find my podcast there. You can subscribe to it there, all sorts of stuff. And of course, if you're on LinkedIn, please look me up and follow me on LinkedIn as well.
All right. And do you have a final challenge or call to action for folks looking to be awesome at their jobs?
Well, it didn't come up during our conversation, or I mentioned it just briefly. Be grateful. That's another principle of people who are successful. Every day, look for something that's going well and express gratitude for it. And what that will do is it will make you more open to the things that make you happy and make everything you do for work more enriching and rewarding.
All right. Dave, this has been a treat. I wish you much fun and success with your success project.
Thank you very much, Pete. Really generous of you to have me on. Thank you.
I loved a lot of what Dave had to say, but the thing that I come back to the most often is the experiment of one. I am a sucker for pulling up full text journal articles of different studies. Like, what? Dr. Andrew Huberman says cyclic sighing can give me a stress reduction, not only acutely in the moment, but ongoing. Oh, fascinating. I should go do that. And so on and so on. Many such practices I have looked into. And I love what Dave had to say is check out your own results. Do a 2-week experiment. See and ideally determine upfront what would progress look like? What would I expect to see and feel and experience if this thing were working? Is it working? Maybe that practice is not for me. And that doesn't mean I'm broken. It just means maybe I'm one of the 30% who did not respond to that thing in the study, which is quite common. So thanks to Dave for that unorthodox answer and other wisdom shared here. Again, the show notes and the transcript and the links to items that we mentioned here is at awesomeatyourjob.com/EP865. Hope to catch you next time, and peace.
Thanks for listening. To get the most out of the show, we recommend 2 key things. First, check out the extra resources at awesomeatyourjob.com. You can find this episode's transcript and links, as well as the perfect episode for your situation. You can search the full text transcripts of hundreds of episodes or explore episodes tagged by topic and competency covered. Second, subscribe to the podcast and get future episodes automatically. You can subscribe by telling Siri and several other smartphones and speakers, subscribe to the How to Be Awesome at Your Job podcast, or by tapping subscribe in your podcast player of choice. If you'd like some extra help figuring out podcasts and how subscriptions work, visit awesomeatyourjob.com/subscribe for guidance. Hope to catch you on the next episode of How to Be Awesome at Your Job.